This is Greg Canty here, and welcome to the Win Happy podcast. Stay tuned for interesting chats with interesting people about winning their lives and being happy at the same time. This show has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. Thanks for listening. After 150 days of war in Ukraine, Paul Niland, who's been living in Kyiv for nearly 20 years, gives us his perspective of life in a war zone and his deep insights about what has happened and how it is likely to end. He met Micheál Martin on his recent visit to Ukraine and explained how the Russian brutality witnessed in some towns is the norm and not the exception. He doesn't talk about fear, he talks about anger and resolve. He doesn't talk about the war ending, he talks about victory for Ukraine. After 150 days of this brutal war in Ukraine, it's easy for us to lose focus. It's important that we keep listening and we keep understanding. I hope you enjoy the show. Paul Niland, a huge welcome back to the Win Happy podcast. Thank you so much for jumping on today. It's a weekend Saturday. I can tell you where I am in Ballincollig in Cork. It's piddling out of the heavens. And, you know, we're kind of cursing our luck, a bad summer day and everything else. And, you know, typical crappy summer in Ireland and everything else. But I'm sure for you, it's a little bit different. You're sitting in Kyiv, 150 days on from the invasion. And I asked you a question when you were on my podcast, because we recorded this 20th of Feb. 2022, it was the Sunday before the invasion when it was still a question, was this going to happen at all? And I even asked you, you know, was that going to happen? You weren't sure. We were all looking at a crystal ball and wondering what the hell was going to happen. And you've been in Kyiv for nearly 20 years. I got a real sense of you that day that you love the place, something about the unique spirit of the place. And even though there was a big car crash about to happen and descend upon you, you know, a reason for a lot of people getting out of the place, I was asking you, how do you like living there? So before I ask you to chat or anything else, just want to play a little clip maybe to remind you of that conversation just for a second, if that's okay.
I mean, the question was 2022, is Ukraine a nice place to live? Ukraine's always a nice place to live. I would not still be here other than for the fact that I enjoy my life here. It's for reasons that I've mentioned. It's an interesting and fascinating place. I'm glad that I never left Ukraine. I did leave Kyiv actually for just over a week. A friend had asked me, in fact, to go to Poland to go and visit with her, but I said I wouldn't leave Ukraine, but I'd compromise and we'd meet in Lviv in Western Ukraine. As it happened, the time that we spent in Lviv, there were oil refineries on the outskirts of the city that were hit by Russian cruise missiles, and the airport in Lviv was also hit by a Russian missile too. So, you know, there's no safety anywhere in this country, and we see that from the random attacks, and it can only be described as terrorism, like random attacks of terrorism on various cities throughout this country, and you know, there is a new occupation in the south of Ukraine since the 24th of February. There is expanded fighting in the east of the country since the 24th of February. There's a lot of talk, obviously, about the Russian failed attempt to capture Kyiv, to capture the capital. But, you know, this has been an exceptionally tough 150 days for all of us. But I'm glad that I never left Ukraine, and I'm proud of the fact that for all but just over a week, I've been in Kyiv throughout it, and things were terribly difficult for a whole, you know, host of reasons. But at the same time, those of us who remained behind, you know, including the shop workers, including like when we'd go to the shops to see what we could find on any one particular day, obviously the supply chains were massively disrupted. I mean, there was no fresh meat, there were no vegetables. That, you know, it was tough to get things. But the lady who works on the till, you know, I would have a smile with her, and we would exchange pleasantries, and you know, that kind of thing is still remembered now. You know, and amongst the residents of the residential complex where I lived, you know, there's a good bond between us of, we all know who each other are. We were there looking out for each other and looking, watching each other's backs.
Yeah, because on that day, on that Sunday, you were telling me about your cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
And she was coming in to look after your house. And did she spot a gun or something that you had there that some friend of yours had given you? Or was it even a gun, or was it some protective wear? And I think she made a comment to you that she was going to jump in as well. You were going to join the Citizens Army if all this was going to happen.
Yeah, it was my bulletproof vest. She said that she also was considering joining the territorial defence. I tried twice to join the territorial defence. The first time was about 2 weeks before the all-out invasion, and then the second time was on the 24th of February. And when I arrived at the recruiting office with my bulletproof vest, obviously, when I arrived at the recruiting office, there were hundreds and hundreds of people there, very, very determined-looking people. Our Kyiv was under attack, and those people were taking no shit, right? And the guys from the recruiting center were basically standing on the steps, and it was every 10 minutes. I was there for a period of time because I was observing it as well. But they were saying, we have this number of automatic weapons and we've got this number of volunteers. So if you haven't got military experience, we don't need you today. Go away. We'll let you know. Like, leave your contact details and that'll be that. So I know how to shoot. I'm quite handy with a firearm, actually. I've shot plenty of them, but I don't have military experience. And there were enough men and women, both men and women, who were sufficiently experienced, who were there and who were being issued with weapons and then being issued with orders of where to go and where their block posts would be. And, the block posts in this city, I never described them in any of the interviews that I was doing at the time because it would be giving away, security features. But as we later found out, there were plenty of Russian saboteurs running around inside Kyiv as well at the time. So they already knew how it looked. But it was basically every second intersection, every second street block was concrete blocks, sandbags, and people with automatic weapons. Like, if they'd have entered the city, they'd have had, not just from the territorial defense, but from the other local units who were doing and preparing different things and getting prepared potentially for the occupation of Kyiv. But fortunately, they never got through. The Ukrainian military pushed them back, but they had a good try.
And that day when I was chatting to you, you were going for a walk with your female friend and her dog around some park area. Is she still in Kyiv, or would she have disappeared like so many other women?
She left for about a month, maybe 6 weeks. She was out in Western Ukraine, which is actually, that's where she's from originally. She's now back in Kyiv, and I just saw her this afternoon. In fact, we went for a coffee together. She's a good person. She was also here for my. I had a big birthday on Monday. I didn't have a big party. This is not time for a party, but I had just 8 friends over just for a quiet evening at home. I was 50, and I had to meet the occasion somehow. And so she was over here on Monday as well. And we were just saying today, when we were sitting together today, like, we were sitting on a calm, peaceful Kyiv street at a coffee shop, having a coffee, chatting about her life and mine, and on the surface, it could look like Kyiv was functioning like any normal city. But the reality is, for all of us, is that the only thing that we're all focused on is the war and the devastating effects of this war. One of our mutual friends that I saw at the same coffee shop, he had been serving since the 24th of February. He's a guy that I've known for years. I bumped into him by chance today, and he was telling me that he's got several offers of units that want him to come and join them. And that will be it then. Like, there will be no more breaks or returns. He will be there until the victory, until the end of this war.
And life in Kyiv, Paul, during that 150 days, because the war came pretty close to Kyiv for, I'd say, would it be the best part of 6 weeks maybe during that time?
Yeah, 6 to 8 weeks. I don't remember exactly what it was. But I mean, you talk about the war becoming very close to us. There's a city which is, it's a suburb almost of Kyiv, but it has its own status. And it's called Irpin, and it's now famous. People know Irpin. They know Bucha. They've heard of these these places now because of the horrors and atrocities that the Russian army committed when they were occupying these places. But for us, Irpin is our back garden. Like, that is where we go if we're lucky enough to have friends who live there, and we get an invitation to a weekend summer barbecue. That's where we go. We all know this place, and what happened while the Russians were in charge of it was people were simply executed on the street, civilians with a shot to the back of the head and their arms tied behind their back, quite potentially if they had links to the Ukrainian armed forces. If they'd been captured and interrogated and admitted that either they or someone in their family, which is basically, that's all of us now, right, had fought, then they were just executed. And the women were raped and their homes were looted. Like, that's what the Russian army is. But the other really, really important thing is that, when we have our foreign dignitaries, actually the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, was here just a couple of weeks ago. And when our foreign dignitaries come to Kyiv, they're taken to Irpin because it's so close by. It's so accessible. And what I say, I managed to have a conversation with the Prime Minister at some point that day. And one of the things that I said to him is that this isn't an outlier. This is not an exception. This wasn't like a particularly brutal set of events. This is everywhere. The way that the Russians behaved in Irpin and Bucha is the same as they are behaving everywhere that they have occupied since the war started in 2014, but also since the 24th of February of this year. That's what they do. They are in Kherson, in the occupied south of Ukraine, where that's going to be an interesting place to watch. You'll be hearing a lot in the news about Kherson in the coming 2 weeks. 10 days, 2 weeks, and I can explain why. But in Kherson, the Russian FSB, which is the KGB simply renamed, right? They have been sent there to go and root out the partisan resistance to the Russian occupation. And they are doing so with very, very brutal tools, and that's why that place has to be liberated. The Ukrainians who live there, who have no desire at all to be somehow folded into the Russian Federation, be under Putin's control, those Ukrainian citizens have to be liberated, and they will be liberated, and that's what's coming soon.
That level of brutality that you're describing, do you understand that? Because from what we're hearing, a lot of the foot soldiers are young men who've just been conscripted, and how that's possible in any human being, it defies me anyway, defies so many people.
I can only give you and your listeners some reading advice. There was a piece on the New Yorker last week, and the advice I'll give you before I give you the name of the article is some people should not read that. Some people should not read that article, because what it describes in terms of the brutality of the way that those people acted is going to be incredibly shocking to everyone, and some people just shouldn't read it. But the article is the Ukrainian psychologists working with rape victims on the New Yorker, and then you will understand the mentality of these people and how they have been driven to sheer hatred by the propaganda that they've been that has been drummed into their brains to lay the groundwork, to lay the foundations for this war. It is evil and it is hatred. And when you put those things together and know that it's a very, very deliberate policy as well, the only conclusion that you can come to is that the Putin regime is as bad as Hitler ever was. And in the future, we will study three great horrors of this modern period. Fascism being one, Nazism being the other, and Putinism being the third. And to get an understanding, the New Yorker piece from last weekend, honestly, Greg, I follow the particular topic of conflict-related sexual violence very, very closely because that is something that I knew from day one. The organization that I lead, which is our National Suicide Prevention Hotline, Lifeline Ukraine, I knew that Lifeline Ukraine was going to be having to help people pick up pieces because of this specific issue. And so I followed this very, very closely. But But even so, when I read that New Yorker article, it describes evil.
I think we're pretty much the same generation, and we read all the history books about World War II and the Nazis and everything else. And you kind of separated that from everyday life now, don't you? That was a different time, and that kind of evil just isn't possible today. But it bloody well is. It's around the corner.
It's not around the corner. It's right here, and it's confronting us now.
Yeah, it's around my corner. It's on your doorstep, which is fairly incredible.
I mean, actually, I'm glad that you phrased it that way, because that's actually something that people like. There are a lot of people who think Ukraine's over there somewhere. It's a faraway war. It's not. It's not. Ukraine feeds millions and millions and millions of people. And one of the demonstrations of the cynicism and the evil of the Vladimir Putin regime is that just yesterday there was an agreement signed. From the one side, there was Ukraine signing with the United Nations and Turkey. From the other side, there was Russia signing with the United Nations and Turkey. Ukraine and Russia did not sign anything together. But the point of the deal, brokered by the United Nations Secretary General and the Turkish president, the point of the deal was to allow the export of Ukrainian grain, right? This morning, the Russian military has fired Caliber cruise missiles at the Odessa port, specifically at the grain storage facility. And Section C of that agreement that was signed this time yesterday and violated 20 hours later, Section C says that the parties will refrain from attacks on the infrastructure and storage that will enable the delivery of grain, right? And, when there is, first of all, a deliberately manufactured famine, right? I mean, we've seen famines, and I mean, we were recalling our history lessons when we were kids. We remember seeing what was going on in Africa, when we were teens, right? And the Live Aid concert to provide food down there. And the fact is that Putin is deliberately trying to engineer that. He's deliberately trying to engineer famine throughout Africa and throughout the Middle East, who are the largest recipients of Ukraine's agricultural exports. And with that, with potentially the starvation of millions of people, he seeks to create, as he did in Syria, and then exploit as well afterwards, he seeks to create a migrant crisis. And when the migrant crisis comes, that does then affect more and more people, specifically in Europe. Ireland has taken in a great number of Ukrainian refugees since the all-out war began on the 24th of February. Something like 4.55 million Ukrainians have left to other countries. And Ireland, in actual fact, is above the EU average for the number of Ukrainians who you are hosting there. And I'm grateful to everybody back at home. But the next refugee crisis, the next wave of refugees, is what Putin is trying to do right now. That's exactly what this is about. Despite the deal that was signed yesterday, he still is intent on trying to starve millions of people.
Why sign a deal yesterday and not pass the memo to the guy that's in charge of the missile machine? What the hell is going on?
So I believe that Putin is kind of cornered by the international community at present. There are some things that, although he doesn't want to do them, he doesn't want to unblock Ukraine's ports and allow us to export grain. I think he needs to be seen to be at least participating in some kind of semblance of discussions. What there are no discussions about, what there are no negotiations over right now, is a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. And the reason is, as our defense minister tweeted around about 2 weeks ago, he simply tweeted, our negotiating team is on the battlefield. And, we've seen since the 24th of February a blitzkrieg attack across a lot of Ukrainian territory and the occupation of a lot more Ukrainian territory. But things have shifted on the battlefront. And things have shifted in part, because we now have an air force. I wrote an article 2 weeks into this war saying, we haven't got an air force. We need one badly. And now actually we have planes and helicopters that were mothballed in storage facilities in various neighboring countries have found their way in, and they're being put to good use. But the big game changer in the south of Ukraine, and what will be the game changer in the east of Ukraine as well, is the long range heavy artillery systems that we now have here. We have the HIMARS from the United States of America. We have Crab units from Poland and Caesars from France. They fire a very, very large projectile over a very, very long distance. And what Ukraine is using those for at the moment is it is targeting command and control posts, fuel storage depots, ammunition dumps, all that kind of stuff. And over the last 2 weeks, 100 high-value military targets have been taken out by those weapons. And that effectively ends Russia's ability to be able to continue any kind of fighting, whether it's offensive or trying to hold on to the gains that they've made since the 24th of February. And the Ukrainian armed forces will liberate the south, starting with Kherson. What's happened in Kherson over the last 4 days, actually, so if you can imagine, we have like you'd have counties in the United Kingdom, and each county would have its largest city, and that's where the administration of the county comes from. We have oblasts here, and largely they're pretty much all of them. Yeah, they're all eponymous. They are the Kharkiv Oblast is the area surrounding Kharkiv city, right? Kherson Oblast is Kherson city and the surrounding areas. So Kherson, the city itself, which is currently occupied as the administrative center, that's what the Russians felt that they needed to have. Kherson itself is attached to the rest of the Oblast of Kherson by a bridge. And that bridge was hit a few times 4 days ago with this long distance artillery that we've got. And then the following day it was hit just once. And then the following day, they planted 7 bombs on it, 4 in one line and then 3 in the next, just to show how accurate they are, just to show we can take this out at any time. And so however many Russian soldiers are sitting inside of Kherson city at the moment, they know because they've been warned. You have a couple of choices. You may retreat now. We have left the bridge passable for now, or we will cut off the bridge, therefore you are cut off. There will be no backup. There will be no resupply. You will get no new ammunition or fuel or anything. And you will surrender, or they're going to be killed. And those are the 3 choices facing the Russian occupiers in Kherson city at the moment. And when Kherson city is liberated, one thing that's really going to do, actually, is it's going to punch a massive hole in Putin's propaganda, which is remarkably effective, not just in creating hatred amongst the troops that he sent to invade, but in creating hatred and delusion in Russia itself among the widespread population. There are many people in Russia, still a majority, who believe that the Russians have come here to liberate Ukrainian territories that wanted to be liberated. And nothing could be further from the truth. So when Kherson city and then Oblast is genuinely liberated, when the Ukrainian armed forces are victorious in returning those people to a normal and safe and peaceful life, Russia's entire propaganda narrative is going to be destroyed.
Yeah, because Putin has pushed himself into a desperate corner with all of this propaganda. And in a way, internally, he needs to continue with that war and continue to liberate Ukraine and everything else. And I know what you're saying, and I know how much they control the media, and I know you do follow, all the stuff that's going on in America as well. In a country like that, where you're free media, half the damn country still think that the election was stolen. So if you look at a country like Russia, where you control media 100%, pretty much, you can see how easy it is to hoodwink, brainwash, whatever words, hypnotize a whole country.
Yeah. It's been going on for so many years as well. It's a cumulative effect too, the effect of propaganda.
Have you any line into Russia, to people from Russia? Is the real story breaking through anywhere? Would you have any connections through all of the work that you do?
I don't have any personal connections there, no. I do follow what are reported to be Russian attitudes. It is a dictatorship. It is a police state. So people being asked a question of a man with a clipboard, they wouldn't freely speak their mind. Somebody's sitting at home in the evening, the phone rings, and I'm doing a survey. What's your opinion of Mr. Putin? And you're going to say, I think he's amazeballs. I think he's great, right? Because what else are you going to do, right? You're potentially going to the gulag if you say what you really think. But no, I do. It's necessary to understand how propaganda works and the kind of propaganda that's being used. I wrote an article actually for the Center for European Policy Analysis, like a month, 6 weeks before the war, which was the 5 biggest propaganda myths that Russia are laying the foundation for war with. And, that stands the test of time. The 5 things that I wrote about in that article are the very 5 things that Russia has been erroneously, falsely, dishonestly claiming ever since then.
Can I ask you about fear? And since we spoke on the 20th of February, have you been fearful? Have there been days when you've woken up, you're petrified? And your neighbor and their neighbors. Can you see fear gripping people, gripping your neighbors?
Because I work in the field of mental health, I'm not one of those guys who, thinks you should bottle up your feelings, or I think we should open up and express ourselves. But I will tell you honestly about myself that no, I haven't really had moments of fear. But I've seen it. I've seen it on other people. I mentioned that I was in Lviv in the west of Ukraine for just over a week out of this 150-day period, and I was in a shopping center. Funnily enough, actually, the national anthem played over the PA system in the shopping center, and everyone stands up, hand on heart, sings the national anthem. 5 minutes later, the air raid siren goes off, and then I saw fear. Because we know that shopping centers are being targeted. They're targeted specifically during the day as well, when they would be full of people. And you saw people rushing to settle their bills, take their food. We were sitting in a restaurant, take their food away with them, servers rushing around everywhere to pack things up and everything else. There was fear there. But more than fear, my overriding reaction or emotion has been anger. I'm pissed off. I'm angry that my city came under attack. I'm angry that they thought that they could, roll through the center of my home. Right? This has been my home for 20 years. I'm angered and saddened by the vicious and cruel terrorist attacks. We're talking about shopping centers. There was a shopping center in a place called Kremenchuk in Poltava that was bombed again with a massive Russian cruise missile, and again during the day. And Poltava is a region which, it's not subject to any fighting whatsoever. And Kremenchuk, it's a relatively peaceful city, but at any moment a bomb can fall out of the sky and affect anybody's life. And another terrorist act as well 10 days ago, and a city called Vinnytsia was hit. And I know Vinnytsia. I've been there. I went to a wedding there some years ago, and it's in central Ukraine. It's to the south of Kyiv, a couple of hours away by train, but because it was considered to be a relatively safe city, many people who've been internally displaced by the conflict, having left other areas that are, occupied or in danger, a lot of people moved to Vinnytsia, and then they were subjected to that attack. And the final death toll of that attack was 28 people. One more person just succumbed to their injuries yesterday. She'd apparently 85% of her body had been covered in burns. 28 lives ended in an instant on a terrorist attack on a peaceful city. So yeah, I'm angry more than fearful. Look, I mean, the stories that I've just told you, they demonstrate that anywhere is a target at any moment. And I'm not a religious person, but for the grace of God go I. It could hit at any of us at any time. But I think what's important is that we don't let it break us. We maintain a focus on pushing towards victory, on making sure that the international understanding of what's happening in this country is as good as it can be, which is why it was great to see the Irish Prime Minister here in Kyiv very recently, 2 weeks ago, and I had an opportunity to chat with him as well and give him some of these Ukrainian perspectives, because that's what I am. I'm Ukrainian.
Was he engaging with you?
He was an extremely. He's a very thoughtful individual. And yes, I as I said, I managed to have a conversation with him, and he just returned from going to visit Irpin. And I told him that I'd seen a photograph of him looking at the atrocities that were committed there and the damaged buildings and destroyed buildings, not damaged, destroyed. And I said somebody had shared it on social media with simply the words, sometimes a picture does tell 1,000 words. I said, and what I'd like you to understand is that what you saw there in Irpin, that's not an outlier. That's how they act everywhere. This is what the Russian army is doing everywhere they occupy. And the other thing that they're doing as well, and this is something that has been little reported, there's been some reporting on it, but Ukrainian citizens are being forcibly deported out of the occupied areas in the south, or the newly occupied areas since the 24th of February, in the south and in the east. And fully 2 million of them, Greg, 2 million Ukrainian citizens have been passed through what are called filtration camps. And in those filtration camps, people are being tortured, people are being raped, and people are being executed. And one of the things that will get you executed in those camps is having a patriotic Ukrainian tattoo, which I have. I've got a big, our national symbol is called the trident, the trizub in Ukrainian. And I have a tattoo here on my torso. That would have me exterminated. And 2 million Ukrainian citizens have been put through that process and have been dispersed throughout Russia.
It's all tactics to break your resolve, isn't it?
I don't know what your house rules are on swearing, but we've got away.
Please do.
We've got away
Please
with
do.
No, the answer to a tactic to break our resolve is fuck them.
Yeah.
No. We are not going anywhere, and there's many sad elements to what is happening. I mentioned earlier on, I saw a friend today who's been serving. He's choosing a new unit right now. I have something like 30 friends, 30 people who I am very close to, maybe 35. I've never counted and I don't want to, who are a part of the armed forces. They are serving, they are fighting. It's people I've worked alongside at Lifeline Ukraine for the last 2.5 years, because half of our team was made up of veterans, and they immediately got recalled and went back to barracks and back to the front. I know that there are some of my friends who I will not see until this is over. And I know that there are some of my friends who I will never see again. They are, some of them will pay the ultimate price for Ukraine's victory. And I'll always be proud of the fact that I will have known those people, but just their loss, which, I mean, it is inevitable with the number of people I know who are fighting, their loss for such a pointless war, which is based on lies. It's based on lies. It's based on hatred. It's based on Russia's imperial ambition over Ukraine. It's disdain for our growth, for our democracy, for the values that we hold, for the fact that we're a wealthier country and they consider us, lesser cousins or whatever. But in actual fact, Ukraine as a society is streets ahead of Russia. And that builds resentment there. It's part of the reason why they've looted things from here, because they simply don't have that stuff back there. No, fuck them. They will never break our resolve. Never.
It's utterly pointless. And I think we got that message from that island at the beginning, wasn't it, when the Russians were trying to get those guys to surrender, and I think they got the response.
Day one, that's exactly what it was. I mean, the island is called Snake Island. It's since been liberated. It's now back under Ukrainian control. That was about a month ago. That was one of the first big victories of those big heavy weapons that I was mentioning, right? Because the Russians were putting men and equipment on there, and we were just lobbing missiles at them from 50, 60 kilometers away and just destroying them, blowing everything to smithereens. And yeah, no, Snake Island. When the Russian military vessel, which was called the Moskva, when the Moskva radioed the outpost on Snake Island and said, "You will surrender," there was a conversation between the man and woman in the control room, and they're like, well, "No, tell them to go and fuck themselves." And the guy's like, he presses the button on the radio, and he's like, "Idi vam nakhoi." Like, it's exactly what he said. And then actually, the Moskva itself, which was the Russian flagship in the Black Sea, that then got sunk by a very ingenious Ukrainian attack on it, and that was another big victory. That was another big milestone in this last 150 days as well, the sinking of the Moskva.
All of those little instances, Paul, they must have been huge for the morale of the people.
Yes, of course, because we know what we're fighting for. And that's the other big difference between the Russian tactics and Ukraine's resolve. We know exactly what we're fighting for, and they really don't. Like, they've been sent in here. I mentioned that separate article with the 5 propaganda narratives. One of which is that Ukraine is overrun by extremists, right? And you see Russian diplomats. They're not diplomats in any sense of that we would understand them to be. But even at the level of their representative at the United Nations Security Council, sitting there and talking about denazification. We don't have a problem with Nazis. We just don't. But the Russians are coming in here going, "Tell me where the Nazis are." Well, when they're occupying towns, villages, whatever, and the response is, "We haven't got any." Like, you're chasing a myth. You're chasing a myth, right? And heaven forbid, but if I was a Russian citizen, I'd be sitting there and I'd be looking around and I'd be saying, McDonald's is closed, IKEA is shut down. We can't get certain international brands of tires or what. I mean, like, so many Western companies have pulled out of Russia, and there's so many sanctions from the world against Russia. I'd be sitting around, if I was a Russian, in the middle of that and going, "Do you know what? Maybe it's us. Maybe actually we are the ones who are on the wrong side here." But no, they are so zombified. And what's going to change that? What's going to change the zombification is the liberation of the south of Ukraine. And keep watching that space. Keep watching Kherson.
I was so excited that we were going to chat today. And I was chatting with some of my own friends. I know you're going to see some of your buddies today sitting around having glasses of wine or cups of coffee. And I was saying, I'm going to be chatting to Paul. He's in Kyiv. What do you want to know? And the big question they all had is what everyday life is like. Do you still get your hair cut and go for coffee and go shopping and go to the bank and change the tires in your car? Like, is normal life even possible?
So I couldn't get my hair cut for 3 months because because all movement was, there was nothing but essential movement, and the city was really, really quiet as well. Many people left the city. It has, over the last couple of months, returned to a semblance of normality, but there is no real normal, and there cannot be a real normal until the victory. And that's what we say here. We don't say until the end of the war. We say until the victory. And then, then it's going to be time after that. Then it's going to be time for us to each take stock of what we've had to process during this period of whatever length of time it turns out to be. That's when we'll be able to take stock. We're already seeing a massive increase, a surge in demand for the support of Lifeline Ukraine from across the country. And it's only PTSD, to take one diagnosis of one particular trauma-related condition. PTSD is something that usually begins to manifest itself 5 to 6 months after the traumatic event, right? So here we are at 5 months in. And before the 24th of February, Lifeline Ukraine used to average, and was holding fairly stable for a good period of time, we used to average 1,000 calls per month. In the month of June, there were 2,775 calls and chats together combined. So, there's already a large psychological toll on us. And in the final reckoning and recounting of things after the victory, the depth of the national collective shock and the scale of the individual traumas is going to become more and more and more apparent. And that's the backbone of not the backbone, it is the work that my organization is destined to be dealing with for many, many years into the future. To answer a question, because of my team being dispersed in various locations and the veterans going back into the armed forces, and the general situation, we left our office base on the 24th of February. Today, I went and looked at 2 new potential office premises. So if people want to understand what things are like in Kyiv, there's a concrete example of something that I've done today. I have been spending the last 5 months rethinking how Lifeline Ukraine needs to approach these series of parallel crises that we have unfolding here. And I now have more of a kind of a disaster management perspective to that. And I have put in place plans for training for the different kinds of specific problems that we deal with. But yeah, today I went to go and look at new office space, and I will create a new home for us that will be our base for many years to come. And one of the places that I looked at, probably the one that I'm going to take actually, in the main room, which is the call center, it will give us the ability for future growth. It will give us the ability to have up to 8 consultants consecutively working out of that call center. And so that's the capacity that we will get to. I don't know when we will get there, but that's what I'm doing. I'm planning for the future as we must.
Yeah, and for the listener, Lifeline Ukraine is a national suicide helpline, effectively.
That's exactly what it is.
I think it was set up primarily for military, was it?
First and foremost, that was our reason for coming into being, was that we would specifically provide support for veterans who have been fighting since 2014. The Minister of Health at the time foresaw that this was going to be a problem. We would have veteran suicides, and she wanted to create something specifically for that, and she volunteered me to take on the responsibility for it. But we are the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. We deal with absolutely everybody who needs our support. And people, for example, I mentioned the 4.5 million refugees that have gone overseas. We have 7 million internally displaced people, and people who are displaced, from their comfortable surroundings that they know about, they have a certain set of things that they have to process. And so one of the things that is one of the training sessions that I'm lining up is one is for victims of conflict-related sexual violence. And again, I mentioned the New Yorker article earlier in the interview, but also we'll do a training session specifically for people who are displaced. We'll do another training session for bereavement. There's several things that I have coming along the line that will continue to build our knowledge and make us all better professionals and put us in a bit better position to be able to serve this nation. That's what I'm doing.
The trajectory of calls to your helpline, without a doubt, is going to keep rising and rising. So I think she chose you in the first place, Paul, to do that work, and it sounds like it's going to become even more important than when we spoke last.
I said in an interview that I did actually just a couple of days ago that every nation needs to have a suicide prevention hotline. It's still like almost 3 years since I launched Lifeline Ukraine. It still amazes me that we never had one before. Like, there just has to be one everywhere, right? There does. If the question that you were going to ask before I came back was how does this war end, I'll answer that question and then I've got to run to go and meet someone. The war ends with Ukraine's victory and Russia's eviction from all Ukrainian territory, including the territory that they occupied in February of 2014, being the Crimean Peninsula, and the territory that they've been fighting over since they created the war there in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions in the spring of 2014. All of it will be returned to Ukraine. Ukraine will be victorious. Russia will be defeated. And there is no other end. That is the only way this goes.
Can that happen without other countries getting involved in the war?
To a degree, many other countries are already involved because they are our partners and allies, and they are sending us the equipment that is making the victory feasible. That is what has been happening over the last several months. And in terms of boots on the ground, President Zelensky said this a couple of days ago, and he said, there are 40 million of us. And that's what they are. I told my story about going to the recruiting center on the 24th of February. Greg, there were so many people there. There were so many people. Like literally, it was not an embarrassment of riches, but it was a wealth of riches of very determined, very patriotic people. And so it was. We have this many guns. We've got this many people. If you don't have military experience, go home. But people have been joining the military, going and getting training and getting experience. And there are more than enough people in Ukraine willing to fight for Ukraine. We don't need American boots on the ground, but we need increased air assets. We need a massive supply of ammunition, especially for these big guns, which logistically is very, very difficult. And we need more of those big gun units. The reason we need more of the big gun units is because the front line of territories that are under Russian occupation right now actually extends 2,500 kilometers. And so when you've got like a HIMARS system that can hit something at 50, 60 kilometers, right, that's great. So we can penetrate 50, 60 kilometers from the front line into occupied territory. But then you need one of those HIMARS systems like every 15, 20 kilometers along. Not every 15, 20 kilometers. I mean, obviously, you place them selectively at the population centers that have been occupied. That is where they are sitting because that's where the rail infrastructure is for them to have their ammo shipped in and stored and that kind of stuff. We'll continue just destroying that and destroying Russia's ability to continue waging this war against us, which is entirely unprovoked and based on lies, man.
Yeah. So without boots on the ground, with continued international support, Ukraine will prevail.
Absolutely. There is no doubt in my mind, or whoever I'm going to speak to today, tomorrow, yesterday, last week, next week, there is no doubt in our mind Ukraine is winning this. And that's the only way it ends.
And in an Irish context, we were chatting before we started recording, and I was kind of saying to you that I was talking to a friend of mine in the media, and he was talking about how our bandwidth is 3 weeks, the shock and horror and everything else. And now the war in Ukraine has become a little bit of wallpaper. It's affecting our fuel prices. It's affecting the inflation with food supplies and everything else. We even saw a little thing last week. I think there was a poll of voters where there was a majority opinion given that we're at a limit now with refugees. We can't take any more. Mm-hmm. That's how it affects us. So what I'd like to do, with your permission, I thank you sincerely for bringing the whole topic to life again for our listeners, because we can't look away and we can't forget, and it can never be wallpaper. But I'd like you to come on again and to keep telling us the news stories and bringing it to life for anyone who's listening. Paul, happy 50th birthday. I'm sure you didn't think you'd be celebrating your birthday in a war zone, but please celebrate it, and please be safe.
Greg, I always enjoy our exchanges, whether we're chatting on Twitter or whether we're chatting on your podcast, and I'd be more than happy to come back with you at some point in the future. And I am grateful to your listeners for giving this topic their attention and for caring enough to listen to this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good birthday.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you for listening to the When Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.